My college draft is proudly announced my conference called Educate You. Educate You core areas will cover recruitment, retention, and how to build a strong alumni base of underrepresented and first-generation college students.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Educate You, brought to you by My College Draft, where education is the new money. I'm Lamont, and I will serve as your host. Here's my outstanding panel of fine gentlemen. Y'all go ahead and introduce yourselves, please.
My name is David Hartman.
Ricky Frierson.
All right, all right. Y'all make me laugh. On the eve of, well, not on the eve, but the day after July 4th, everybody knows it as Independence Day. But for some people who kind of know a little bit more, it is the anniversary of Frederick Douglass's speech. And what I want to do, man, I just read it, and it's kind of tugging on me a little bit. But Ricky, I want you to go ahead and set the foundation and the premise and the landscape for this particular discussion, please.
Yeah. I thought that with everything that's going on in the world right now, this would be a prime time to talk about what is freedom, what is independence. I mean, as you stated before in the intro, that July 4th is the nation's Independence Day. But we all know that we spent a lot of time in this past Juneteenth, as being the official independence for Black Americans or African Americans from when we were finally free from slavery back in 1867 and in Galveston, Texas. And so, I just wanted to, or 1865, I just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that we're in a weird dichotomy right now in the nation, because as we're celebrating independence for this nation, I think a lot of people are realizing finally that did not necessarily mean independence for all of the demographics that make up this nation. I mean, literally in the Constitution and in the preamble and the Bill of Rights and everything else, it's talking about the freedom of speech, the freedom that all men are created equal, in the midst of having slaves, right? In the midst of keeping certain people down. And so I think our fellow Americans are now finally waking up to this. And so I think it's just weird how that aspect of history is being reshaped and re-evaluated through a new lens. And then we also add on the fact that we're probably in one of the most restrictive times of our country with COVID. And you can't really do much. I mean, for me and my kids, I was happy because I never liked 4th of July in the first place, just because it's too much popping and, banging and mass gunshots, real gunshots really well. And so I'm like, you know what? I keep my butt home on Halloween and 4th of July. Those are the two holidays I just stay home. And so, but most of our nation had to stay home anyway because of COVID, right? And so, in the midst of us celebrating, quote unquote, the independence and freedom of this nation, there's still a restriction personally for us as far as the health aspect with COVID, right? And so, and then when you look at really the essence of why our nation wanted to seek independence from Britain and England, was because high taxes, not taxation without representation. So you're taking my money, but you're not giving me a voice. And then, your property could be stolen at any time by England, and you just have to, submit yourself into English rule. How's that different than a lot of minorities in America right now? There's a lot of people who pay taxes with no representation, no vote. There's a lot of people who have their resources or the limited amount of resources either stripped from them. And so it's funny how there's a lot of parallels going on right now in our society. And the real thing I wanted to bring up is, and have the discussion on, as much as, there's a lot of negativity and a lot of negative slant towards 2020 right now, because a lot of crazy stuff has happened so far. But is it necessary for it to happen? And what if this is finally the year that makes sure that 2021 is a whole new look, right? Because if you look at the number 2020, that represents clear vision. Mm-hmm. And I think Americans are getting a clear vision of really the issues, the root of the problem, not just the symptoms, but really evaluating the root of how we're dealing with things, and then rooting all that out, really getting out the last vestiges of of hatred and bigotry and classism and elitism, and really trying to go into 2021, hopefully, with a sense of a renewed humanity that's truly a multi-centric, multi-ethnic perspective going into the new year. But we'll see. I mean, time will tell. I think we're making progress, although it hurts. You have to, like when you put alcohol on a wound, it hurts, but the alcohol is there to clean out the bacteria and the infection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is what's happening. But we'll see, because the presidential election will be the last thing. Depending on what happens with that presidential election, that'll let us know, did we really get out all the root of the issues, or is there going to be still a covering to allow some things to fester? So we'll see.
That's awesome. David, do you feel as if American society, there's a clear vision, a view of what's been impacting people of color historically?
Oh, do I feel like there's a clear view? I don't think so. I mean, I think there's some things that are coming to light, but there's still a lot of stuff, I would say, that's behind the scenes, that's systematic, that a lot of even us as Black people don't know and are not aware of. Do we feel those things? Yes. I mean, we feel not getting the equal pay. We feel the difficulties of trying to get along. We feel difficulties of trying to get education, all those different things. But there's deeper workings that I feel like we need to get to make some real change in the world. But I don't feel like, no, I would say no. We don't know everything that's going on. Like I've mentioned in the past, is as much stuff is revealed that we are doing as a Black community, there is an opposing threat to that, right? It's the same as if you're a religious person and you say, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore, right? Well, as soon as you put that into the atmosphere, the devil is also listening. So as soon as you say, I'm not going to do this thing anymore, then the devil's like, well, let me see. And he's going to continue to throw that temptation in your face of whatever you said you weren't going to do. So we still have that in front of us.
If you're tuned in for the very first time, this is the Educate You podcast, again, being brought to you by My College Draft, where education is the new money. Educate You, our topic, our subject matter is always affecting people of color. Academically, we address issues for underrepresented first gens. This is the I keep saying that, I do apologize, y'all. It's the day after on the 4th of July, which is the anniversary for Frederick Douglass's amazing speech, and that is recently being coined as "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." And just real quick, I just want to read just a little small passage from that. It states, "What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim." When you hear those words, fellas, what comes to mind? What today kind of still connects to that historical statement and passage that happened so many years ago? And
I think number one, the discernment of Frederick Douglass to even have those words to share with the public lets you know how prolific his mind was and how aware he was of the nation and the state of the nation at that time. I think of it, for him personally, bravery to say those things, because this is supposed to be America's birthday, and we like, bump your birthday. I don't want your invitation because I'm not free, right? And so on the thing, how does that relate to today? I mean, mass incarceration is still big on that. The long-standing consequences of having a felony record is huge. I would think there's still aspects of our police relationships. You know, I was watching a movie during my time down in the basement. For those who don't know, I was on quarantine because I was traveling. Not because I had COVID, I was just traveling. But I was watching The Great Debaters again. And one of the things about The Great Debaters was talking about, you know, it was St. Augustine.
Yeah.
Unjust law is no law whatsoever, you know. And so if an unjust constitution is not a constitution for everybody. If you're gonna take that, you see what I'm saying? And so I think that's what Frederick Douglass was sharing, is that the fact that this constitution was built to talk about rights with no inkling whatsoever of bringing in specifically African Americans and slaves, right? And another movie I was watching was The Patriot, the old Mel Gibson movie, right? Just because, you know, we have nothing else to do, just Netflix and chill. That's what I was doing. And so I was watching The Patriot. And in The Patriot, in the midst of them trying to go and fight against Britain or England or whatever the place is, to establish American freedom, Mel Gibson in this one excerpt is trying to get people to join his militia, right, to fight the Redcoats. And there's this old guy, and he literally says, you know, I think these Redcoats killed my brother, and so I hope every single Redcoat died because they killed my brother, and the way they killed him was just unjustified, right? And he's like, so you gonna join the army? He's like, no, I can't join. I'm too old. I'll be a hindrance to the militia group. I'm gonna give you my Negro. And now I was like that scene, I'm going to fight for freedom because these jokers killed my brother and we not free from them, but let me give you my slave to fight for me on my behalf. Like, it spoke on so many levels. I was just like, do people even see the irony in that? That you talking about you want freedom, and they killed your brother, but how many times have we seen slaves lynched and hung?
Right.
And how many brothers and sisters do we have? You know, like, how deep could our family tree be if we were killed and stuff like that? And then on top of that, to make matters worse, I'm a slave. I don't have the same kind of rights in this country that you have. And then you believe so strongly in your independent rights that you want me, involuntarily, to go fight for you. I don't even have a choice. I have to because I'm your slave. And the irony in that scene, I was like, bruh, really? Like, that's the mindset. And so I don't think a lot of people are understanding that. And I mean, it goes back to kind of like the whole thing with the Drew Brees situation, right? Where he talked about, I'll never respect anybody who kneels against the flag, and people had to educate him. His own team members and stuff was like, you over here talking about the honor that your grandparents had on fighting for the nation, but you're not even accounting for the fact that a lot of African-American soldiers and Hispanic soldiers at that went and fought for this flag and then came back and didn't have any rights whatsoever. And we fought for the same flag. And so I think, you know, all these things are irony, right? You know, and I always have respect for the military. My dad was in the Army for 22 years. So I'm always going to have respect for the military. But I think it's the mindset of individuals sometimes, you know what I'm saying? And so that's what I think is interesting, is that there's people who have this like, fantastic and fantasy-based ideal of freedom because of the privilege that they come from, and not seeing it from a totalitarian lens of understanding how everybody else is seeing, or a comprehensive lens, I should say. So
that's a deep perspective. David, anything that you see connecting back to Douglas's speech?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that still reigns true in a different format. I mean, even though at the time when he gave the speech, slavery was still going on. And then, you know, later on, like Ricky mentioned, in 1865, slavery was abolished. But I feel like that was yes, but with a clause. So when you look at the 13th Amendment, right, you're free, but until we take you to jail, then you're basically a slave again. And then here comes the increase of Black people going into jail or into prison. So I feel like a lot of the stuff still rings true. And then now the stuff that you say okay, now you're free, but now once you're in this system, okay, now I'm going to take away your voice again. So now you don't have the right to vote anymore. You have to wait a certain amount of time, or you got to go through all these loops to do stuff. So I feel like it's the same game. The page is just flipped a different way and presented a different way. So I would say that would be my perspective on it.
So David mentioned earlier about when the devil hears, he then attacks because he knows your weakness. It seems as if when there's injustice against those people of color, there's almost like a formula. There's injustice, and then we riot. There's injustice, then we riot. So it seems as if the devil now knows the strategy. And so we were listening to, if y'all recall, we were kind of sharing a video about a young man was kind of stating that there are plants from the opposition within the community to spark the riot, to look like it's people of color that actually is doing a riot, when it actually it is the opposition. So how do we change our strategy? How do we be more disguised in our approach to making life better for us?
I think the strategy is a little bit different this time. I think the main objective is, to me, you have to attack the political arena and the legal arena, but the catalyst of that is to get more of these white allies to be proactive. Because what we all know is that white America still has the privilege of having a command on the legislation, on the political arena. But now with this video of George Floyd kind of shaking the earth, more white Americans are kind of coming out of their, what I'll say, racial hangover, and starting to realize, like, oh crap, we need to do something, right? And so I think the more we can get white allies to be proactive and to use their position to institute change, the better our chances are having success. Because if you notice, each time we've had a protest, if you go back from the 50s all the way up to now, there was always like a sprinkle of whites, and it got a little bit more, and now we have a lot more. And now what's even better is that in addition to whites, we have international whites and foreigners who are jumping up saying Black Lives Matter. So even if you're in England, if you're in Spain, or if you're in Australia, everybody's on the Black Lives Movement, which lets you know that this racism thing is truly what I believe, a demonic force, because it's globalized. This colorism is globally affecting civilizations. And so one of the things is we need white allies who are not afraid to step up and stand in the gap, to understand and recognize that they are the ones who are going to have to come up and fight, because we've been fighting as well, but they're going to have to make the stage for us to come in there and share our views and stuff like that, or write the legislation in a way to where we can have a fighting chance to change laws and stuff. Because, you know, it's no secret that Black America, Hispanic Americans, Chinese Americans, we've been fighting to have laws changed for years now, right? You know what I mean? I saw a little Instagram post thing that said, like, if your culture hasn't been held up in the Supreme Court to decide whether or not you have rights, then you have privilege. And if you think about that, every culture besides white culture has been held in the Supreme Court about rights. And so I think, you know, the more we can get the white allies to understand that racism affects everyone, not just people of color, but everybody, the better we have a chance of actually turning the system around.
So as they continue to, you know, support the people of color, like in the direction of like politics, like how do they, like, go more in detail, Rick, like how will they help us get more political, not power, but like rights that are actually real rights and not fool's gold?
Well, hopefully what will happen is you'll see more white folks who will wake up, and I use that word intentionally, will wake up Black folks and Hispanic folks to pay attention to their local elections. Who are you voting for mayor? Who are you voting for chief? Who are you voting for city council, who you voting for, board of education. And the more we can wake up to those things, because the president, we all wake up thinking that if we vote for the president, we've done our duty. But if we know, if anything we can learn from Trump, here's one thing we can learn from Trump. Trump is only one person. He needs the House of Representatives and Congress to do his bidding. And how many of us pay attention to who we're voting for in Congress and the House to represent us? Not a lot of people, right? And a lot of those people move up the ranks. And so if we know someone was a bad mayor, why are we letting them run for House, right? Or why are we letting them run for Congress or Senate or whatever the case may be? So Trump is just one person, essentially. And so what we can do is, and if you think about it, back in, 2020, so back in 2016 or 2017, or whenever we had the midterm elections last, we saw that shift in the House. A lot of Republicans lost their seat because a lot of people were understanding to really change the president and the laws that are happening, you really need to focus on the House and the Senate. And if you can focus on the House and the Senate, then you can start to have people in there who are more multicultural in their views and understanding of how these policies affect a wide swath of people. And so I think that's the first thing we need to do, that is to understand that. And because then, if you get a comprehensive, district attorney, those are the ones who are going to understand what kind of public defenders need to be out there that's going to have the best interests of people of color. You know what I'm saying? If you start paying attention to your local elections and the judges that get appointed, that's going to help diminish the mass incarceration rate and this unequitable sentencing that's happening. You see what I'm saying? But a lot of us don't pay attention to who we're electing for a city judge or a district judge, or who we are electing for district attorney for the state. You see what I'm saying? So these things we need to pay attention to, because those small gears are critical gears that can help reconstruct how we look at the House and the Senate and then overall the presidency.
You're just now tuning in. You're listening to the Educate You podcast, where education is the new money, brought to you by My College Draft. Today's topic is basically on the July 5th. Frederick Douglass made a very amazing speech on what does independence mean to the slave. And so my question I want to pose to you guys kind of stemmed from a text that I received. It was basically, there was a voters registration that just took place. And so with some guys, the position where they were kind of like doing the registration, it was more in the urban part of the city. And so the people that were coming, that they were kind of like encountering, all had prison sentences. And so they were like, well, you can go ahead and vote. And so they were like, nah, I can't vote because I have a prison sentence on my record. And the guys were like, well, you're good as long as you're no longer on paper. But in their mind, that answer wasn't good enough. And so the guy who was doing the registration said they probably would have listened if I was white. So he was like, he went back and kind of like trying to revamp his strategy, right? So how do we get word to those who are still in prison mentally that freedom does exist and can exist for them too?
I don't know. Quite honestly, I think we need to. That's one of those. Maybe that's a guess we need to bring in someone from. I mean, I did social work, but it's been so long and I'm not that well versed in the legal system to understand how someone with a prior felony can vote. Because I was under that same impression. If you had a felony, now I know there's two different ways you can make a felony private and public. So there's a lot of folks who have like felonies with their private record, and so when you was to do a job search on that individual, you would never know that they had a felony. But unfortunately, a lot of people of color who have felonies do not have the money capital nor the human capital to get a decent lawyer who knows how to finesse the laws in that way. So I honestly couldn't speak on that to tell you how we would change that, because I would need to be educated on how we can change that.
So if you take, and just really just came to mind just now that you were talking, Ricky, is so Booker T. Washington, when he was coming of age, slavery was ending, and he was basically letting people know slavery is over, but the people was like, but what do we do now? We've only known this our whole life. What do we do now? So if what you said earlier is this is a new type of strategy that's taking place, and that mentality was to occur now, how do we then approach this, again, the prison mind? How do we tell them that they're free? So we truly can be liberated as a people.
Well, I think, and David, jump on the back of this because I think you might see where I'm trying to go when I say this, but that whole mindset is very similar to when Moses led the Egyptians out into the desert, right?
Yeah.
And then what was it? After a certain amount of years, they was like, "Why did you take us out here to get killed? Like, you brought us out here to die, right?" But none of the people from that generation got to see the promised land. They all died out. It was that new generation. So, not to sound morbid or like crazy, but there might have to be a dying out of the old ideology and perspective of how things are going to change, and let the new generation come in and really take a hold of what needs to come, right? So that generation for 400 years was held in bondage, and then gets sent out into the desert for 40 years, and everybody died out. And it wasn't until everybody died out from that mindset, that prism of mind, that they were able to enter the promised land as it was written in the scriptures. So for this, it's one of those things where I think you have this really, really good energy from the I don't know, what's this, Gen Z or whatever they call this generation now, that's really trying to be like, no, we ain't about to fall for the okie doke on this. We about to change things up. They got more technology. They move quicker. They're able to connect things faster. And I think our generation, we're in that middle, right? We come, like we're the generation of the internet. Like a lot of us went to school, and then somewhere between the time we started to the time we graduated, we were introduced to a computer for the first time and stuff like that. Where these cats now, they grow up like my baby daughter, 3 months, and she over here, dang near, she could probably look at the phone and start texting. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just ingrained in them. And so I think the old ideology is like, I think it's time for a lot of the people from the older generation to understand and have faith. Hey, it's time for us to sit on the sidelines. Let these young cats do it. Because look at what happened. I mean, they literally shook the world. They literally shook the world out. And we didn't shake the world with Mike Brown. We didn't shake the world with Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor. You know what I'm saying? We didn't shake the world with nobody else. But all of a sudden, this group sees the George Floyd and they shake the world. And so that's just my thought process on it.
I would say too, a lot of it agreeing, Ricky, we have to change the mindset, but we also have to change the mindset about ourselves. I mean, we go back and think about school and what you were taught. You weren't taught about these great, phenomenal Black people who've done all these amazing things that you have access to today. You've only been fed images of yourselves in a few different ways, right? And one that rings loud in a lot of the communities that we grow up in is a very negative one. Okay, so if I could only see myself in this one space, what makes you think I'm gonna go, okay, yeah, maybe I can go vote, or I can make a difference, right? A lot of us feel like we are trapped in this environment that we live in a lot of different ways, just because the opportunities and stuff aren't there. And then if you get an opportunity, you got to fight twice as hard to get where a white counterpart is in that space. So really, first, believing in the people's selves and trying to get people to believe in themselves, understand the power and the knowledge that they have, and really focusing on self. I guess for me, really, a lot of it is you can't love anything else until you learn how to love yourself. And people got to take time and figure out who they are and where they stand in the world. What is my purpose? So then I can then put that energy into the world. As people's minds change, their actions change. And as their minds grow, their actions grow. So that would be my part of my answer for that. So
I like it. Ricky mentioned he used the example of the the children of Israel as they went through their journey and was starting to complain, like, you brought us out here to die like this. And so, because I think, this is my personal opinion, because they had an imprisoned mind, God had to feed them like a baby being fed by a parent, so he gave them manna. And so so one of the things I want to ask you guys, what are examples of manna that I would say those people of color who may have wisdom, what form of manna could we then feed to the people that are in prison so they can come along, so we can get more people to the promised land? Like, what is the examples of manna that we can feed people, man, so they can get, so we all can get to the promised land, at least a majority of us. So I'm gonna have to die off, but what kind of manna can we give to these people?
Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of stuff that's out there with the touch of Google. I mean,
Yeah.
you can just Google. I mean, like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, I think for almost this entire summer they literally have, like, I know Netflix has one and I know Hulu does. They literally have a subject line that says Black Lives Matter now, or Black movies, that it's all about movies to educate you on why this racism thing is a situation, right? And like looking at movies that really touches your mind to make you think about things. The 13th, I Am Not Your Negro is on there. The Great Debater is on there. Ali is on there. Malcolm X is on there. Do the Right Thing is on there. There's all these Black movies from the past few decades to really wake people up about the racial constructs of America. And it's on all these channels. Bro, like, there's really no reason why no one can't get in contact and educate themselves through YouTube, through Google, about just different things. If you want to Google, like, if someone doesn't know about the Frederick Douglass speech, they can just type that in. Frederick Douglass speech, 4th of July, boom, it's right there. You know how crazy this is right now? Let me tell you how crazy this is. Never in my life have I ever gotten on a PlayStation 3 or Xbox game, and Xbox, the first message that comes up on the game when you start the console now, before you play any game, is their statement about why Black Lives Matter.
Dang. That's
What?
deep.
What? I've never got on a game system and they be like, before you play this game, let me tell you our company's stance on why Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
And that's before you play any game. They put that to override. So first of all, it made me kind of nervous because I was like, how did they hack into my stuff and was able to put this message, because I didn't approve of it. So I got nervous about that. So y'all know how I am about government. I got real nervous. But the second thing, this is dope. So I think to educate people is no longer the issue of me giving you the book.
Yeah. Okay.
The issue has now become, do you want to find the book? Because it's so easy to find anything with the resources that we have now, that you can just type in the internet. You can call somebody. You see what I'm saying? So it's more about showing them, like, hey, here's things to do. Here's things to look at. So for me saying, like, when people talk about, can you give me resources, I get mad about that.
Yeah.
Especially with white allies, because it's like, or white individuals, or in general, can you give me resources to learn more? You got Google and Yahoo. You type in educational resources for white people to know more about Black folks. Boom, you're going to get a whole list.
Yeah.
Like, but don't put the work back on me, because I'm still trying to survive this life as a Black man. You see what I'm saying? And I don't have time to teach everybody. Now, my job is my job, and so of course I do what I do, but that's my thought process behind it.
So, Rick, I'm curious, man. So let's say, for example, you were invited to the as fresh as possible, that when Floyd was killed, that big protest. Mm-hmm. What would you as an expert in your field, what would you have said to the people?
But talk to David and then let me think about it.
Okay, David.
I was like, I don't want that heat. Don't give me that pressure. Oh man, what do you say to the people when that's happening?
Yeah, like when it was like fresh, and I want y'all to think in terms of when the riots hit, and somehow James Brown was like, I'm about to do this concert, and they kind of calmed the people down in DC. Like, what words could have come from your mouth that would have penetrated these people, man, what would you have said? I'm just curious, man, because I think those words will still ring volume now because it's still a lot of anger that's going on. It's not as before, but I think it's like now it's like, okay, now the emotion died down. What are we gonna do now? Kind of thinking. And so I'm just curious, what words will come out your mouth?
I would probably speak to the fact that how many times are we going to fail the test as minority Americans and as our Black Americans? Where we've known that our riots is the voice of injustice of the people, right? And so one thing that it is that if we know that the system is devised in a way in which we do not have keys to the locks to change the system. What we can start to do is change the locks. Right? And so, what are we going to do to change it? We might not have the keys or the privilege to get to certain these locked doors, but trust me, you change the locks, that key don't even work now. And so that's why I think what you're seeing with the whole defund the police, which I don't like the word defund, I like to reformat it and stuff like that, because I think you need to reallocate the money into other places. You don't defund the police altogether, but that's just a personal opinion. But I think what we would have to talk about is this manner or this instance of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck is more than just a white-black issue. It's more than just a police issue. It's a system issue. We need to understand the police was literally invented back in Boston, 1836, 1838, somewhere around there, with the mindset of to protect. And what were they protecting? Other people's property. At that time, Blacks were slaves and property. So when you think about the essence of how police was started, it was started with the foundation that you are not an individual, you are property, number one. And when we start looking at the legal system in the Constitution, in the highest laws of the land, we were considered 3/5 of a man, right? And so this is also something that continues to be a barrier. So if we get trapped or we become prisoners of looking at the system of racial injustice and national injustice by the standpoint of just looking at it as a black-white issue, police and civilian issue, we're missing that there's so many gears to this system that is jacked up, right? That has perpetuated and allowed, what people want to say, bad actors. Let's just call it what it is. Racist people hiding behind the badge. There's racist people hiding behind the judge bench, right? There's racist people hiding behind politicians and the laws that governs this land. There's racist people that hide within the confines of the university, and they hide behind their intellect, but they're still racist. There's racist people that hide behind the Housing Act and how constructions and housing neighborhoods are developed. And so until we start to recognize that, if we have to do a coordinated approach to attack all factors and vessels of what the system currently is, because the system, each one of those gears was a gear to make sure minorities were not successful. And so even if you try to dismantle one gear out of the 10 gears, hypothetically there's 10 gears that make up the system, even if you dismantle one, all you've done is you've taken down a little bit by 10%. But the overall 90% is still going to be effective and efficient. So we have to be mindful and, okay, we're talking about we want to defund the police. Okay, that's fine. Let's go with that. You're talking about let's get rid of the monuments. Okay, that's fine. But we need to start changing laws. We need to start changing educational policies. We need to start changing funding policies to housing. We need to start changing the way that our welfare is taken care of. We need to start changing criminal justice reform. We need to do all these in a coordinated effort. And so if we're going to use this mantle and this vehicle of Black Lives Matter, we need to capitalize on that and make sure that we have representation in all these gears to attack them systematically. Because me just attacking criminal justice and then I'm still allowing injustice to happen. And I'm not saying that we're doing that, but in education and housing, et cetera, versus if I start taking a 1% on each gear at the same time, then overall the system is going to change, because it cannot, what you call, when you have a damage to a system, it cannot compensate for the damage to one gear because all the gears are being damaged at the same rate. See what I'm saying? If I'm a system, though, I can compensate the damage of one gear and put the extra effort on my other 9 gears. But if all 10 of my gears are being damaged at the same time, there's no place for you to compensate for that leverage. And that's what it needs to be. It needs to be a comprehensive approach to attack these fundamental gears that have continually oppressed and held down our people and our nation. So within our nation, I should say.
If you're just now tuning in, you're listening to Educate You podcast, being brought to you by My College Draft, for education is the new money. So I got a question real quick, fellas. So Ricky, you sparked a lot of stuff, man. So I'm curious to say, I'm curious to find out, is Black Lives Matter a philosophy or a real entity? And if so, if it's a real entity, how do we keep it from being destroyed ultimately like they did the Black Panther movement by infiltration? Does that make sense? Like, how do we protect it if it's a real entity? Because if it's philosophy, you know, it's pretty much like a gas. It exists in the atmosphere kind of thing, and it can keep going and keep going. Nobody see it. It just exists. But if it's a real entity, how do we protect it? And that's the most important thing, how we protect it and how we keep it from being destroyed.
Well, it technically is an entity, because I mean they're a registered organization. It's not just like a made up thing. I mean, it's formed with the mindset of equality and justice from Blacks specifically. But there is, like, you go look, type in there, they got a website and everything else. So based from the legal lens, they are an official entity. How do you attack? How do you make sure they don't get addressed? Well, this is one of those things where you have to have multiple heads on one. When you think about, there has to be multiple coordinators that move around so that the government and those who oppose the movement cannot have a single person to identify. That's what happened with the Black Panther movement, right? You had Huey Newton and others who were the central figure. So it's easy for the CIA, the FBI to come in here and say that they're domestic terrorists, start to bug their house. You had Malcolm X, who was the central figure. You had MLK, who was the central figure. Most of these men end up being assassinated. Some of them went crazy. You know what I'm saying? They're being bugged and stuff like that. It's hard to attack something that's a constantly moving target, though. So when there's, if you kind of align and organize yourself with the idea, but there's different kind of like organizing parties within the regions that move and coordinate, and they have this back page on the website and stuff that they could coordinate with, then it's really hard to hit a moving target. And it's really hard to hit the head of a moving target when there's multiple heads. So, the same way in which the system has 10 gears to fuel their system of racism and oppression, the anti-system cannot just have one gear, because then that's 10 gears focusing on one. We need to have 10 gears or more, so that way when they do try to compensate and try to attack something else like that, we're coming at you in too many different ways simultaneously, to where it's hard to attack the moving body. It's hard to attack one figure. And so I think if everybody starts to jump on board, I think one thing that you're starting to see is, and I think what we're trying to do is finally get out of the prison of what media has spoken. But when you start to see more Black and Hispanics and Asian and Blacks come together as one, because we always knew if the minority populations came together, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. If we can come together, if we can stop the gangbanging and all that, and if the different groups can come together to go against white supremacy and white privilege, it's a wrap for whites as far as their power, that they hold. And so I think what Black Lives Matter is doing, and you're seeing Black Lives Matter, you're seeing the immigration and the DACA issue that's coming out, and that's kind of galvanizing the Latino population and the treatment they have with the police. And then we can start coming together, even if it's the Blacks and Hispanics, right? And those two groups start to come together, That's a large percentage of the nation.
Mm.
It's going to be very, very hard for the government to try to curtail that percentage of the nation. It's going to be very, very hard to do that.
Mm. So, Mr. Brian, thank you for jumping on, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I'm curious. My personal opinion is this. I haven't looked at any stats. I know enrollment in college has kind of gone down a little bit, but I feel like with this Black Lives Matter heightened sense right now, I think that like HBCU should benefit. So as a result of that, will the HBCU in the atmosphere of Black Lives Matter be able to now turn that back for the community and help replenish and help rebuild the community?
Who you asking?
Mr. Bryant.
Oh, you put me on the spot.
I sure did, brother. Look at him.
How's
I
everyone
want you to
doing?
get out that witness protection program, brother. There you go. There you go.
It's good to see everyone. Repeat the question for me.
So I'm curious because my personal opinion is that I believe in the spirit of Black Lives Matter and the entity that Ricky just, he's very eloquently just stated. How you guys the HBCU should benefit off of this spirit right now, and you're going to. So once you benefit, how does that now become a formula to rebuild the community? Because we talked about earlier about we talked biblically about the manna that had to be transferred to the people of Israel because they was in prison mentally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we now create like a manna from the HBCU perspective to help rebuild and replenish the community after all this mess?
No, that's a really good question. I think it starts, forgive me for being late, you all, but I think it really starts with kind of how the way we shape and view just all things Black in society. I think that, if the African-American community alone, if we were just to support our own entities, and if we use historically Black colleges and universities as one example, I think that we could really start to mitigate a lot of the social issues, economic issues, and social disparities that we see in our society. But I think it just really starts with support. I think that one of the ways that we're starting to see various, athletes, 5-star, blue chip athletes who are, redirecting their attention from the traditional or fabled institutions like the Dukes and the UConns, et cetera, and starting to look at historically Black colleges and universities and supporting them. And so, I think it's a complex question, and I'm trying to provide a simple answer to it. But I think one, it just really starts with support.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky, what are your thoughts? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Ricky, and then David.
I think that would fundamentally shake higher ed. If when people, what's funny to me is there's a lot of whites right now asking their questions. So I'm gonna make sure I look dead in the camera when I say this. So there's a lot of whites asking this question: what can I do? What can I do? Well, here's something you can really do. There's two things. Number one, if you are an alumni, a successful alumni who's a donor at your predominantly white institution, why don't you make sure that your money is going to provide a scholarship for a Black or Hispanic student? So that way Blacks and Hispanics don't come out of the education cycle with debt, because that ends up being another barrier, right? So that's a simple thing that you can do. You can instill and make sure that I'm going to use my money and my financial way to make sure that our minority students who come through this institution that I so love don't have a debt, so they can go out in society, because we already know that the earning rates between Blacks and Hispanics and then whites is not equitable. And so we could start to give them a place to where, although they're not making as much money, which needs to be equalized, but they still don't have any debt to hold them down constantly. That's number one. Number two, I think going along with what Justin said, I do think that there needs to be a narration to where if people want to know how important minorities are to this country, okay, it's a good game right now. I hear people talking about, I'm boycotting the NFL. I'm boycotting basketball because they're going to, the NFL's thinking about playing the Black national anthem in the first week. I'm going to boycott basketball. I'm not watching college football again. Okay, let's pull that card out and let's pull that bluff, because I guarantee you, if every one of our Black athletes in college went to a HBCU, all that money to go see those prime athletes, will go to those HBCUs, will bolster those up, and y'all and people can talk all the trash they want to in America. We are one of the most competitive nations in countries in the nation in the world, right? And if we didn't have football to watch, think about how sad people was just in the midst of COVID for 3 months, and they couldn't watch the NBA finals, and they couldn't watch baseball, and take out all the minorities out of those sports. America will change real quick, because then what's going to happen is if minorities created their own league or found a way to fund themselves or go to, do whatever, and then we didn't need those white owners or whatever the case may be, people will be hurt, and then all of a sudden they won't want to come to the table. The only reason why you start to see the Washington Redskins and the Atlanta Braves and all these other teams start to change, to even consider changing their names, is because money's involved. Because Daniel Snyder for the Redskins, from the longest, has imminently said, I'm not changing the name. But then FedEx, PepsiCo, and all these other people like, we ain't giving you no money. He says, you know what? It's just an insensitive name. It's something that's not appropriate, and I need to do X, Y, Z. And so we need to understand that, especially in some arenas, we have a lot of stake and a lot of value at stake. And we can move the dollars by just moving the athletes.
Yes. David, from the city of Texas Southern.
I'm going to ditto Ricky on that. I mean, that was especially the part about the athletics. I mean, most of our talent goes to those big schools. So what would it look like if HBCUs now had these big television contracts and all of your main athletes are there? That's going to be a huge pull and turn that's going to happen in higher education. And as much as a lot of people don't like to believe, but athletics pulls a lot for schools. Just that experience of going there and being a part of that environment and being in the know is a big thing for students. I mean, we see it every day in the business that we do working in higher education. So I feel like that would be a huge turn in that direction. So.
Do you think it will really happen, though? Do you really think it will be the days of Walter Payton and Jerry Rice at HBCUs again? Like,
it has to be coordinated. It has to. I think this is something that is a catalyst. I mean, like, I think this young group now, if you gave them that idea, I think they would really evaluate the possibility of coordinating that effort. You know, I mean, like, you got the young man, one blue chip star that I think Justin was referring to, who was a top 5 recruit, and he said he's going to some small school in Georgia or something like that, or HBCU in Georgia. And so he's like, why not? And I agree with that 100%. It's like, if you can start getting that and bolstering that, and a lot of people don't realize statistically, 80%, 78% of your black professionals come from HBCUs. They get their terminal degrees at HBCUs, not at PWIs. And so, I mean, we have to understand that the mechanism there for growth and acceleration has always been there. It's just the funding hasn't. And one thing that can drive the funding is the students. And I mean, think about that. You go to if you went to watch, like Southern versus Grambling, and it's nothing but 5-star, they getting ready to go to the NFL, and you didn't have to worry about having a crappy band at halftime. You got a great band on both sides at halftime. Bro, that's a lit environment for 3 hours. You got a great game of top NFL talent. You got a great halftime show, and you're supporting your people all at the same time. Get out of here.
I was just going to add, I definitely agree, because you can really look historically at the SWAC and the MEAC as conferences that produce great athletes. The infamous Bear Bryant from the University of Alabama, he even admitted that Grambling State University in Grambling, Louisiana, where Eddie Robinson was the coach, arguably one of the best college football coaches. He said they had the best football team, but we'll never know because they couldn't play them because of segregation. But I think it's something else that I would like to add to this conversation in terms of not just supporting historically black colleges, because that targets one portion of the African-American community. I think we have to also take into consideration the African-American community who are a part of the most marginalized in terms of socioeconomics. This was one of the issues that when people talk about the modern civil rights movement and its efficacy, and whether or not, they achieved progress or did they achieve their goals. And for the middle class African-American community, they did. And then you start to see in the 1970s where there was a splinter of poor African Americans who realized that their dreams were not necessarily actualized because they weren't necessarily benefactors of the progress that was made during the modern civil rights movement. So I do, I'm wearing a Clark Atlanta shirt right now, sweatshirt, even though I'm not an alum, but supporting all HBCUs. But one of the things that I definitely will say is that we have to also take into consideration the least of us. And so I think that Dr. King, we talk about Dr. King, a small portion of his life, even Du Bois, but I think that we don't necessarily consider the evolution of these gentlemen in terms of heroes of the civil rights movement and how they evolved in terms of their thinking. And Dr. King even stated, the plight of Americans, particularly the African American community, is economics. And so I think that we can't just support historically black colleges, even though I think that that's definitely a start that will target the black middle class and the black upper class. But I think that we also have to have efforts in really making equity in terms of working class African Americans, as well as African Americans who are from the working poor.
Can I ask you a question though, Justin? And you don't like what my question is on this one.
Okay.
Utilizing Reagan's trickle-down economics, though, could you see that as a benefit?
It doesn't work.
Hold on. And listen. What I'm saying though, if more black students went to these HBCUs, there's more revenue coming to these HBCUs. These HBCUs now have programs where they can do community outreach to uplift these lower socioeconomic the black tier of these lower socioeconomics, because there's more resources for them to utilize the expertise and the advancement of black knowledge and bring that back to these communities where adversely there's not as much of that correlation with predominantly white institutions.
No, for sure. I definitely agree that there is a positive effect. But I don't necessarily many economists, and this is controversial. Reaganomics, trickle-down economics is controversial because you have economists on both sides that says it works, and you have others that says it doesn't. So I think that it's a really good start, and I think that there could be benefits. But I think I side with both the concepts of Washington as well as the Du Bois. So Du Bois. Du Bois, in terms of educating the talented 10th. But here's the trouble with that. Sometimes especially with capitalism, is that people who make money and make profit always want to make more, and that doesn't necessarily when these companies become wealthy, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily sharing their wealth. We recently saw where Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, where he criticized Jeff Bezos and him being the wealth that he had and the amount of money that he was paying his workers. And so just because the people at the top get money doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to share that money down to those who are the least of us.
So that's for profit versus non-profit.
I'm saying I think that the principle, because it almost sides under the assumption that people go to college to help people. Even though I think the historically black colleges and universities, a lot of them are missioned, and they through instruction, through culture, to helping out and empowering communities. I think that there are a lot of people who they attend these institutions, but they still don't necessarily always give back. And I think that there's nothing to say about historically black colleges, but I think it's just about the nature of human beings. People, we're selfish, we're narcissistic, and I think we look out for self. I think that you will have a portion of people. Yes. So let me first say this. Yes, I do agree that we need to support these institutions. And I do think that by giving more money, I think that it will have an effect. But I think that the effect, what we need in terms of just, the African American community, but really just Americans in general, really people all across the world, is that we need to provide more equitable opportunities for people. And that goes to paying people more jobs. So as a former high school teacher, K-12 educator, one of the things that, we all know is that, students, by the time they arrive to kindergarten, if they have not achieved a certain level, they're likely to fall behind. And if they haven't caught up by third grade, the likelihood that they'll be able to achieve more academically and persist in college is highly unlikely. And so, they talk about, these, communities, these parents need to read to their children more and give them more academic preparation. Well, if I'm working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, I don't necessarily have the time to provide that type of attention to my child. It doesn't mean that I'm not necessarily interested. Because one of the things that I found, having always taught in inner city schools, from New Orleans to my hometown, Savannah, Georgia, to Atlanta, to now in Houston, is that parents of all socioeconomic status care about the achievement of their students. But one of the things that I did realize was that parents who come from the lowest socioeconomic ladder are less likely to have the time to devote to ensure that students are doing their homework, to ensure that students are taking their study seriously. Is not because they're not necessarily interested, it's just because they don't have the time. And so I agree with you. Yes, we do need to direct more resources, but I think that those resources have to be twofold. Yes, empower our communities, the middle class, because I think that they can become teachers and nurses and other professions that we need. But I definitely do think that we have to provide more. We have to pay people more. And I think that we have to advocate for social economics and giving people good jobs and making people have a livable wage. Just my perspective. I hope I answered your question, Dr. Frierson.
I reclaim my time.
All right, you've been listening to the Educate You podcast, once again brought to you by My College Draft, where education is the new money. In these final seconds, fellas, my question is this: I believe that I believe truly in the book of life, and I believe God is God's book, but He allows us to be chapters in that book. And so, in closing, 20 seconds apiece. Your chapter reads as such.
I'll go last.
Brother Dave, you want to take it away?
See, I keep getting thrown in these situations. My chapter reads as such. I would say something I kind of referred to it earlier. Finding belief in yourself, learning to love yourself, learn yourself, and understand that you hold value, and then continue to build your mind, change your mind, and then you can then take those things and put those into the world.
I guess since Ricky said he'll go last,
Damn right.
I'll show deference to the big bro. So I would say when we empower minds, we empower communities, and when we strengthen pockets, we fortify communities.
See, I'm glad to have Justin on. The DASCO, Iron Entrepreneur, right? I think mine would be kind of like when I came to this revelation about a couple of days ago with my walk. Fulfillment, commitment, legacy. Fulfill what God has made you for, commit to the progress, and leave a legacy for the generations so they don't have to go through the same obstacles.
That's deep. So you've been listening to the Educate You podcast, brought to you by My College Draft. Follow us on all our social media outlets: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Subscribe. Tune in every week. We got some hot stuff every week. So again, this has been My College Draft, Educate You. Education is new money. Get some.
There ain't no farther to try. The strong survive. These hurdles I'm facing are